You're listening to Truth Talk, real talk, real faith. Each week, we take on some of the biggest questions and challenges facing Christians today. We'll unpack mysteries from the Bible, examine how they relate to historical discoveries, and connect everything to what's happening right now. Stick with us as we journey through biblical history, connect our faith to the world around us, and address the questions that matter most.
Welcome back. We are back in studio for another episode of Truth Talk, real faith. I'm Mandy Gordon, here with
Bruce Gordon.
That's right. Of course, in studio with our executive producer, Dale Lackey, keeping us straight, making sure that we know what's going on. So we're going to jump right in this week. Lots to talk about, lots in the news, even today. We're recording this on Monday, September 29th. So just what we decided to talk about this week has continued to stay in the news cycle over the weekend, and very interesting to hear all the talk yesterday and today about it. And just to lead into it, it's this what started Friday with the UN, United Nations leadership reaction to President Benjamin Netanyahu's address at the UN meeting, and the walkout by almost the entire group of leaders that were meeting there. And I think they said there were 8 countries that stayed to support Israel, of which the United States was one of them. And, you know, this whole issue surrounding Israel and the viewpoint of Israel in our current times and what's going on, and just, you know, the world reaction is just crazy, for lack of a better term.
It's amazing when they earlier in the week talked about a 2-state solution, and almost again the world turns its back on Israel and says, yeah, we need this 2-state solution. The United States and Australia and a couple of other countries were the only ones that stood. Really what surprised me was the United Kingdom, England. They took that position, and they were the ones that ceded the land to Israel back in 1948, and really all this got started. But here they are really not on Israel's side many times on that.
And it's really just, for me personally, just strikes me so hypocritical, because this is just performative, in my opinion. All these countries are just, they are just performative in their justice, quote unquote, and everything, because you have multiple other horrific human rights issues going on around the world, and yet they are completely silent on those.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you've got, just in the past few weeks and the past few years even, we've got the massacre of Christians, ongoing massacre of Christians in Nigeria. And I sent Dad a couple of articles in the past week about that. And last Thursday night, 67 Nigerian Christians were beheaded because of their Christian faith by Islamic terrorists.
And if I remember what you sent me, there's so far this year around 7,000 Nigerians have given their life.
Yes, sir. And just hundreds of thousands of Nigerians and others, and that's just Nigerians. That's just one country that's over there on that coast of Africa that's very hard-pressed under militant Islamic rule. And, I mean, that's not to mention the Christians in Syria, the Christians in the Sudan,
Iran.
Christians in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is a huge spot right now. I mean, I see stuff about Democratic Republic of Congo all the time. I follow Voice of the Martyrs, and they give a lot of them, and Open Doors give a lot of information about Christian persecution around the world. I mean, even outside of Christian persecution, you know, if you look over the past few years and really the last bit of the Biden administration's, it was the persecution of the Uyghurs in China.
Yep.
And they are a Muslim minority population, and you hear nothing. I mean, it's just radio silence from
they're
these
a
people
very
at the
interesting
UN.
group of folks. They have their own language. They have that northwestern border between China and India in that area, and very sincere in their belief. They are a militant group, and
The Uyghurs.
the Uyghurs, and
Just
they.
want to make
but,
sure you were talking about.
yeah, but China is really decided to crack down on these folks. Of course, China said, "Oh no, we don't do that." But of course, the humanitarian groups and countries tell us yes that they are being severely persecuted. They have taken them and put them in indoctrination camps. If they don't do as they should do, they disappear. It is a catastrophe. And so what you're saying and what we're saying is it is not just it's just Christians or just Jews. There's other groups also being persecuted severely, but yet if you ask the common person out here on the street, they have no clue. There's nothing said.
If you asked all those UN people that filed out of the assembly room at the United Nations conference, they wouldn't know anything about it. Because, again, the whole point is this whole thing about the conflict between the land over Gaza, between the Arabs and Israel, or what they like to call themselves Palestinians, but we'll get into that later, in Israel, it's performative by all these international leaders, France and the UK and the Netherlands and all these people. It's all performative because they care nothing about the other thing. Right. And ultimately, what we realize that it's spiritual warfare rooted in these countries by anti-Semitism.
Right. So why just this one minor group of folks? I mean, in Israel, if I remember my statistics, there's only between 15 million Jewish folks living in Israel, and so that in a very small country about the size of New Jersey. So why all the attention there rather than some of these other conflicts? And of course, as you say, when you start asking that question, the only legitimate answer is there is a spiritual battle going on about this land and this people and what's going on there.
Right. And it's just it is the spirit of the age, first of all. I mean, we realize that as Christians. And it's anti-Semitic. I mean, they hate the Jews. Mm-hmm. These other countries don't want to say it. They don't want to say they're anti-Semitic. I mean, if you were to tell them, well, you're anti-Semitic, they would be aghast at you calling them. And they're so social justice minded but that's what it is. It's anti-Semitic. And that is because this worldview is driven from an evil worldview that's propagated by these Arab countries that want to blast the Jews off the face of the earth. That's what the whole river to the sea means. Yes. You know, like from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And really, if you go back and read some of the literature, doing the deep dive into this over the past few days, you know, you read literature from the early 70s, from the late 60s. Yasser Arafat claimed Arab land from the Atlantic Ocean all the way over to India. Yeah. You know, I mean, so realistic, they don't even mean river to the sea. Yeah. They mean
rid of them and us own everything.
That's right. So. We are, anyone that would align with Israel is an enemy. Right. And it's terror and it's terrorist. And I think if you to define evil, you have to call it what it is. Right. You know, and these are terrorists that are propagating this idea of hatred of the Jews around the world.
Back in the late 70s when Menachem Begin and Nasser, the Egyptian president, came together and had a peace treaty in theory anyhow, working towards one. And what happened? Both of these guys wound up being assassinated by these Muslim extremists. No, there is no peace, no matter what you say. So you can see that underlying, I don't care who it is talking, that it's a no-go as far as that's concerned, which is interesting when we watch this afternoon the president and Netanyahu talk about there's going to be a peace treaty signed, and the folks are going to be able to stay at Gaza, do away with Hamas, and talking about this was not just this, a big peace treaty with all the countries surrounding Israel, and our president said it was an eternal peace. Well, I wish it was true, but that's a fairy tale, not going to happen. The only time eternal peace is going to come when the King of Peace comes and sets his kingdom up.
That's right.
So the thought is good, but you need to understand who you're dealing with and understand there's more going on than just Arabs fighting Israel or as we get into the Palestinian world here in a few minutes. No, underlying that is an evil regime that is bent on destroying, and I understand why. If they can destroy Israel, they can destroy the promises of God, and they think maybe somehow they can win the ultimate battles, and so, which, again, that's a delusion, but that's what the devil's good at, is delusion.
Right. And I think that, as we see this play out, we don't know what's to come over the next days with this. I mean, if Hamas were to sign the peace agreement, that's yet to be seen. They've yet to really sign anything. Prime Minister, I think I called him president a while ago, but it's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, he's yet to sign it because he's waiting to see what Hamas is going to do. So it's definitely something that we need to watch, especially as the Christian community, and to keep our eye on and understand truth. And we will talk about, like you said, this some more when we get to the end of our segment today about, some hard truths, what we as Christians need to rely on. I think that's one reason we need to be very aware of current events and what's going on in our world to see what are the implications. Right. Like what does this mean for the Christian? How are we to operate? What worldview must we cling to? This is why you have to know what your worldview is. Right. You have to rely on God's truth and not our opinion of what should be. This doesn't mean that we give a blank check to Israel to do whatever they want. I mean, I know so many Christians who are very isolationist, and they do not want us getting caught up in world affairs. They don't want us caught up in the affairs of Israel, any of this kind of stuff. And I think we have to be careful. I get the sentiment that, we can support without giving aid, right. But I think as Christians, we have to recognize.
Well, it was the same sentiment right before World War II, and we stayed out of the war for a long period of time until finally, if we didn't jump in, Britain was going to be destroyed by Hitler bombing them. But we thought isolationist was the way, and of course, when Pearl Harbor happened, it doesn't work. I mean, it's a theory, but it just doesn't work.
Right.
You may want to isolate, but the world will not isolate.
That's right.
And so it'll come get you if you don't go to it.
So very interesting current event going on. I mean, it'll continue to be. We'll have to do a follow up if we see if anything gets signed. I mean, one of the key pieces to this agreement is that the remaining hostages, whether living or dead, right. Many are dead, are returned. And the families who are still missing loved ones, they want the bodies of those loved ones if they're dead, and if not, they want their loved ones returned.
Yeah, and our president turned and looked at Netanyahu and said, and if they don't sign this, if they don't do it, then we're going to back you completely to go do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So
it was also interesting. I know we need to move on, but it was also interesting to see that one of the key. So one thing that has happened over the past month or so is the Israeli airstrike in Qatar, who is one of the biggest American supporters in the Middle East.
They don't head this peace.
And they would not speak to Netanyahu anymore after that bombing because one of the Qatari security officers were killed in that bombing. They were going for Hamas. And so Netanyahu had to apologize for the accidental collateral damage that happened in Qatar, and agree that he would not be doing airstrikes in Qatar anymore. Right. He wasn't real happy about it, doesn't seem like.
And that, of course, any time negotiation takes place, there's give and take. And
he said that to his credit.
Yeah, if there's true negotiations, everybody's going to give some and everybody's going to lose some.
That's right.
That's the only way you get to a situation that will.
And that's what the problem is with Hamas, is that they don't want to lose anything. No. They want it all.
Of course, my skeptical concern is they'll sign anything because they're up against the wall now. If they don't do something, they're annihilated.
Right.
So they'll do most anything to survive to fight another day. So, I don't trust any outcome from there whatsoever.
It definitely something for us to watch over the coming days and to see where it ends up being, and how things end up playing out on the global scale.
But no matter, remember, behind it all is a war being waged by the devil and his wicked empire in his attempt to at least cause as much problems in this world as he can, if not overtake. He thinks this is his world. And so that's ongoing and will not stop until Jesus finally puts him into the lake of fire forever and ever. Even after the millennial kingdom, he's still going to be.
Yeah. It's a time of peace only because he's been bound.
Right.
And everything. And you have to remind yourself as Christians, remind yourself who this is. The deceiver of old.
Yeah.
I think the actual term is the Satan.
Yeah.
If you get down into the Greek and everything, and it's the liar, the deceiver. And he is working his deceit throughout the world. That is why it's so important that we as Christians focus on truth.
I mean, just look at this case we're talking about. It was Hamas that came across the borders of Israel in a sneak attack, killed over 1,000 Israelis, captured all the prisoners that we're talking about, the hostages that we're wanting released. They've released some and killed several that they've released, but yet then they want to turn the circumstance around and say it's Israel's fault. Well, that's the deceiver at work. He has done that.
They're starving us, and they're doing all this. Yet they're the ones that have starved their people. Right. It's really a lie after lie after lie, and
it's in front of your face lie. I mean, you don't believe your lying eyes. I mean, don't believe the truth that's right there in front of you.
That's right.
Yeah, So the other problem that we see, and I think you fist to lead us into, is does Israel really have a place there? Is this, or is that, have they lost their place in history?
Why this group of people, these quote unquote Palestinians, who are they? Are they fighting over land that's actually theirs? And so if so, what land right is theirs? So our kind of archaeology or biblical history or even ancient history section this week is, where did that term Palestine come from? And, how do we have the history of the Palestinian people, and what does, what is granted to them as a people, and what can we, to help us determine how to evaluate the situation
and know what's truth here,
right? Mm-hmm.
What is true and what is false, and what is a spiritual battle going on there.
Right. So historically, you and I both have read a lot of articles this week. So historically, the name Palestine was given to the Arabs in this region as an effort by the Roman Emperor Hadrian to push back the Jews in the Judea area, and so he determined this land, and it called it. Did he call it Palestine?
Syria, or he called it Syria, Palestine.
Syria, Palestine, and so this land was. So that wasn't until 132 to 135 AD. If you read literature, it's not going to say CE because we no longer have the reverential AD and
BC
Anno Domini for after the time of Christ. So they say CE Common Era, and
Anno Domini is the year of our Lord. That's the Latin.
So we have this name that's given them, but that's a long time ago too. But so where does that name even derive from?
So Hadrian wanted to do something detrimental to the Jewish folks. So he takes the name of the Philistines, Philistia, and uses a corruption of that name and calls them Palestinians or Philistines is what he was telling them. The Philistines had been their mortal enemy. They had fought for centuries, and now the Philistines had disappeared off the face of history by now.
They disappear about 600 BC.
Right. They actually occupied a lot of the territory that we're calling Gaza, which is, it's amazing how it calls Gaza right now. And they were sea merchants, but they had a tremendous influence. We find when we go into Egypt and look at some of the hieroglyphics, several of the Egyptian kings writes down about the battles that they had with the Philistines and how they, of course, defeated them and beat them. In hieroglyphics, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, you never talk about a defeat. It's always how wonderful we are, how great we are, and how much we beat. But we find that record of the Philistines in their hieroglyphics on some of their monuments and stuff.
Yeah, they moved. It looks like they moved down from like the area in Crete, the Aegean Sea area, and end up in Egypt. That kind of, we have to take our modern minds of what Egypt is off.
Right.
That Nile Delta area. And so they settle into that area, but that area is already being run by the pharaohs and everything. And so you have to so they get run off. They're very powerful people. And some of the literature I read is like they were just in search of land.
Right.
They were leaving their island, we had very few resources, and going in search of land that would be good for them. And so they settle there. So the Egyptians, and you can read some of this about if you do read about the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. That's where a lot of these hieroglyphics are found that tell these stories. So they run them up the coast there where Gaza is, and up the coast of really up that whole coast is if you go back and you look at some ancient maps. And I mean, we only see the Philistine name mentioned a couple of times in the Bible. I mean, we have a couple of particular mentions. There's a mention in Amos, of course.
David runs to the Philistines when he's
being chased by Saul.
By his son.
That was the one with Absalom?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking prior to that.
Maybe Saul too, yeah.
And everything. And so, Philistine is going to be a general term that's used. You got to think about all the other. These are all very tribal places. When the land was given to the children of Israel, or the Hebrew people at the time, they weren't even necessarily called the children of Israel. God made this promise to Abraham, and really you see it when Abraham leaves Haran. And he moves down, and God tells him to wander. He's going to be a wanderer. But however, as he wanders that whole territory, don't miss what Abraham is doing. He's wandering the border of the land that God is going to give him, because he goes all the way to Egypt, right? And then he has to leave Egypt and come back. He is wandering, I use that in quotation marks, because God is leading him on the borders of land. That's why in so many places in the Bible, when you note where Abram had an offering and he sets up an altar, God is declaring who this land belongs to.
Land, that's right.
And so they're used over and over again in biblical history as a way to determine that this is a promise of God.
And of course, folks argue, well, that's just the Bible, and we can't put confidence in that. But we do put confidence in the Bible, but then we do find these other sources outside the Bible that talk about the Hebrew people and their wanderings. And so it is not without evidence that much of what the Bible says can be verified by the actual historical data of the day. And
there's a lot of Assyrian literature. I think it's what I read is like pretty much that time of the Assyrians, the same time that Israel is being taken hostage by the Babylonians. The Assyrians are moving down from that area of Turkey and everything, and they're doing a lot on the coast and everything. And so the Philistines are kind of absorbed by that Assyrian culture, and that's around this is Bronze Age stuff. They're introduced during the Bronze Age. There's not a lot of documentation left over as to who, what, when, where, why, that kind of thing. So you are left with kind of digging through other records of other nations to see what you can pull out. And that's why you can confidently state about the history of the children of Israel. There is
You see it intermixed with all of this.
Yes, and there's a huge amount of archaeological evidence for Israel being in this area
and that's
and
the reason
settled.
That's the reason we want to speak on archaeology.
That's right, and that's what people. It's settled. There's never been a settled Philistine area. Right. There's never been a settled, Palestinian area. When you think about who land belongs to and all that, you have to look at who's settled. What does it take to get land? Right. And then it's not just getting land; it's keeping land. Right. And we see the people of Israel being run out of the land, the Babylonian captivity, right. coming back. They never really have their land again after that.
Before that,
that's right. And they never really are settled in their land again after that. The Roman Empire does a good job of dispersing them throughout their empire.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go and you read in the New Testament how many Jews are from way different places up and down the Mediterranean. You've got, but that was on purpose. You have to see God's plan for it because that is how God intended for His gospel
That's the seed
to
of
be
the church
spread.
there,
That's
yeah.
right. It's how God intended to bring in other nations, and because the Jews were not doing what He had called them to do. So that is the method by which He allows the gospel to. I can't think of the word. Starts with a P. Propagate.
Yeah,
I was like percolate's all that could come to me. That's coffee. So. Anyway, and you have to see this overarching movement of God throughout history so that you can take this archaeological information, index it the right way in order for you to interpret the right way so you can see God's movement. I always say that from creation to Jesus, you can see that arrow being pointed all the way across the thousands of years of recorded history. You see that straight arrow being recorded over to the birth of Jesus. And from then forward, you see that you still can pick up that straight arrow. You see God's work. You see His plan in action. And when you start applying all these things, how else would you be able to understand how these people came from Crete to end up in this area, to be a terror to the Israelites, along with these other tribal nations? You've got the Ammonites, you've got the Canaanites, the Perizzites,
all the ites,
all these people who they were all tribal people that moved and would claim lands for particular periods of times, but God allowed them to go. If you read the Judges and those books that are the period of the judgment and everything, you see Israel claiming the land that Abraham had already walked through. For especially you get around that Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, that area, and where God, and that's going to be in your Bethlehem area.
And we'll talk about some of that in
upcoming
one of
episodes.
Yeah. And so, with that in mind, so then what about Palestine? How did it get involved in all of this? And so when Hadrian gave them this name, that name, the land
to an area.
Yeah, that land that Israel, and it was talking about the land Israel lived in, he called Palestine. And so if anybody's Palestinian, it would be the Israelites. But they never accepted that name. And it faded from history until we come back now into the last century. And then the British in 1948, the earlier compact was in the 20s with the Balfour, and now they cede this land back to Israel because of the Holocaust, all of the things that had happened there. So and they call it the Palestinian Mandate, of bringing it back to Palestine. Simply use that word because that's what the Romans had last called this. Nobody had occupied this land for 1,500, 1,800 years. After the Roman Empire began to dissolve, it became a no man's land. And nomadic tribes would come and settle and leave and get kicked off but nobody truly claimed that. It began in the 1800s to be resettled. Some Jews were there. Of course, we had the Muslim Empire had overspread all of that. All those things have happened. But now it comes back to the land of Israel by dictate of the UN through the mandate of the British in May of 1948. And so we start immediately a battle. I mean, it is 1 minute everything's just who knows. You could have asked folks in the world, where is Palestine? And a large majority of the world would have said,
Who?
huh? What? But immediately, as soon as that mandate was given and the land was ceded to them, war broke out immediately. And but even there, up in there into the early 1960s, there's no mention of a Palestinian. There has never, ever been a Palestinian state. That is a fiction of history.
I found this quote, and it's from 1977, and it's you say his name better, but it's PLO leadership, Zahir Hussein, or Musin, or somebody else. And it's an interview that he had with a Dutch newspaper. And it says, the Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality today, there's no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the extinction of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism for tactical reasons. So right there, you have it.
And that's not a friend saying that.
That's
that was
right.
an enemy saying that.
And he's saying, there's no, and that's the whole thing. There's a distinct Jewish people who are settled in that reason. If you were to go ask people in Gaza, they tell you they're Palestinian, and you say, well, but what's your heritage? Where are you from?
Yeah.
No, but where are they from? They cannot give you. They're Jordanian, they're Syrian, they're Lebanese. They're from all these other settled countries. There's 21 Arab countries, unique Arab countries in the Middle East. And that is who make up the quote-unquote Palestinian people.
Yeah.
So, it's really important that we understand what this is in its truth.
Right.
And to understand there's not a place called Palestine that had a Palestinian people that was a distinct people group in their region. No.
But I assure you go out on most American big city streets and tell a group of folks that there has never been a Palestine, and the people that call themselves Palestinians are really from other parts of the area, and you will probably wind up in a fist fight. You will have been in an argument because most folks will believe the lie.
That's right. And that's, again, we're going back to the Satan, the liar, doing what he does, which is seeding lies and doubt and hatred in the hearts of people.
Unfortunately, I believe you could go most churches and ask who are the Palestinians, and they would
think the same. Well, that's what they're saying. That one of the articles I've read was very much by a very strong Israeli person and supporter. Yeah, he's Jewish and living in Israel, and he says even the Jewish state itself has conceded to this lie by calling it Palestine, by calling them Palestinians. You should be referring to people by their ethnic heritage, which is where they were from, what tribes, what lands they are from, because they're not from a place called Palestine.
Because
there's no such thing as a place called Palestine.
We just heard one of their leaders in the 60s say, "There's no Palestine."
That's right. Never been. That was 1977. So the PLO's really coming into full force here in the late 70s, and here we have one of its leaders saying, well, there's really typically no Palestine. It's kind of just all of us Arabs banding together against Israel,
Well, then whose land is that?
Right. And that's a great transition into, our question that we want to answer, so you have to determine whose land is it, but what is our Christian response to what's going on? It's outside of our borders, doesn't really have a lot of impact on us, our day-to-day anyway, even though for the Christian, it should have a good deal of spiritual impact for us. So what is our response to this conflict?
I'm going to take on the issue today of, is the people in Israel really the people of Israel? We've got a lot of folks out there that think the promises to Abraham were just to Abraham, and there is no promises that those that bless Israel will be blessed, and they dismiss some people of statue. And so
while we don't want to get into that debate necessarily, that's not the purpose of this conversation.
That's not a whole program.
And everything. We do want to say that the Bible clearly says, because we just preached on it this week, that what verse was that? Was that 16?
To Abraham and his descendants. Yep.
Yeah. Do you remember which verse was that?
It was the 17th chapter and about the 5th or 6th verse in there.
Okay.
So I think it's where you're going.
So I will establish my covenant. This is verse 7. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant. I mean, when we talk about truth, what does everlasting mean?
Yeah.
You know, an everlasting covenant means an eternal covenant with these people.
Yeah. Then who is the next person? Isaac. He says, your descendants. Who is his descendant? Only one real descendant, Isaac, because the other son, Ishmael, is not considered.
That's right.
And so then who is after Isaac, and then who is after him? It is the children of Israel.
So after Isaac, you have Jacob and Esau.
And he is called.
So Jacob is the father because he's got the 12 sons who are the 12
and God
tribes
calls
of
him
Israel.
He down through his history, eventually calls him Israel. So there's no doubt about who's being talked about here. So the Bible says that land is an everlasting promise. Now, would they for times be out of the land? Yep. They were kicked out by the Babylonians. The Romans kicked them out in 70 AD, and then again Hadrian kicked the rest of them out, and they've been nomads since then. That doesn't change what God has said. This is their land, and he has promised them time and time again he will bring them back to that land. And I believe what we're seeing today is part, if not the final, at least part of that bringing them back to the land. Right. So whose land is it? If it's anybody's, and it is, I believe it would be the nation of Israel.
That's right. And so what is our response to the conflict? Because there is a great I do feel I'm double-minded about
we have
this.
Empathy
I realize
for
that.
Folks.
We have a lot of empathy, sympathy, whichever term you want to use, for these Arabs that are suffering under the dictates of Hamas.
Yes.
I mean, we realize that they are a terrorist organization who care nothing about the lives of the other people, even their quote unquote own people, you know. And so anybody that will use you as a shield against bullets, guns, bombs, whatever, they don't care about you. They care about power. Yeah. They care about their self. They care about their flesh and what they're going to live now, you know. And so, you know, what are we to then just say, oh, well, you picked them, you voted them in? You know, what is our response to the need for the average person living under great strife in Gaza and that Gaza territory?
Well, at the worst case scenario, the Bible says we are to love our enemies, to feed him when he's hungry, to give him water when he's thirsty. And so it is not natural to our human nature to think that way, but that is how we are to live. So we should care for these folks. But truth should prevail. They should not be able to take the land God has given someone else. But we should hope that they would be able to live in peace and do away with Hamas or any other. Unfortunately, Hamas is just a symptom. You do away with them, and there's more coming. But we should care for other folks. Really what we're saying, we should value all human life. Right. Just like the problem when we talked about Nigeria, the reason that's not being looked at, people don't value them. They don't see the value in those lives, or the Uyghurs, they don't see the value in those lives, or the war going on with Russia, people don't see the value. So we have to learn to value all human lives, just not what we see as what we think is our acceptable world.
That's right.
And that's the spiritual battle that we war in and have to take care of.
Yeah. And the Bible, it tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Yep. You know, and the peace of Jerusalem cannot come without peace in the regions that surround Jerusalem. You know, that is in Psalm.
And of course, when we do that, we're praying for the King to come.
That's right. Yeah. But however, we are to work towards that goal.
Today, yes,
we are at work. God has given us. That's not I think sometimes that's an easy way out. I say, well, that can't happen until God comes. But that instruction is explicit to live out in this world. Yep. We are to work for what God is bringing down, you know, and so we have to be sure that we are abiding by what God wants us to do, but we have to do it with truth, with right, and making sure that we are standing on God's word and not standing on man's definition of.
And do it with a heart that it cares like God cares. So God cares for that so-called Palestinian, those folks in the Gaza. He cares for them. He cares for the Nigerians. He cares for the Uyghurs. He cares for the Chinese. He cares for the Russians. God is not discriminatory on the people He cares for. He loves the whole world.
That none should perish.
That's right.
We need to
So that should
live
be
our
the
lives.
Christian response to it, is to not harden our hearts.
That's right. To pray for peace, but to have a heart for the suffering that's happening all around. And we should have, that's why we have a heart for those that are unsaved. Because if they were to die today, they would, unsaved, they would be eternally separated from God. And it's when you really apply it personally or apply it to somebody that you know, it really
Hits
gives
home.
you a heart
Yep.
for God's humanity and that He desires that none should perish.
Amen. Right.
All right, great talk. Enjoyed the conversation. We know that there'll be more to come around this topic, so we'll cover it as we see what plays out on the national stage. Once again, thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Truth Talk, Real Faith. Don't forget, if you're interested in joining our conversation, let us know. You can reach out on our app or through our Facebook page, multiple ways to let us know that you want to join us for our conversation. And we look forward to discussing more topics on the next episode of Truth Talk.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you feel encouraged and equipped. Thank you for joining us as we explored these important topics. We look forward to having you with us again next week.